everybody, and today I'm going to be reading a couple of chapters of the Twits by Roald Dahl. So, chapter 1, Hairy Faces. What a lot of hairy-faced people there are around nowadays. When a man grows hair all over his face, it's impossible to tell what he really looks like. Perhaps that's why he does it. He'd rather you didn't know. Then there's the problem of washing. When the very hairy ones wash their faces, it must be as big a job as when you or I wash the hair on our heads. So what I want to know is this. How often do these hairy-faced men actually wash their faces? Is it only once a week, like us on Sunday nights? And do they shampoo it? Do they use a hairdryer? Do they rub hair tonic to stop their faces from going bald? Do they go to the barber and have their hairy faces cut and trimmed? Or do they do it themselves in front of the bathroom mirror with their nail scissors? I don't know. But next time you see a man with a hairy face, which will probably be as soon as you step out into the street, maybe you will look at him more closely and start wondering about some of these things. Now, on to Mr. Twit himself. Mr. Twit was one of these very hairy-faced men. The whole of his face, except for his forehead, his eyes and his nose, were covered with thick hair. The stuff even sprouted revolting tufts out of his nostrils and his ears. Mr. Twit felt that his hairness made him look terrifically wise and grand. But in truth, it was neither of these things. Mr. Twit was a twit. He was born a twit, and now at the age of 60, he was an even bigger twit than ever. The hair on Mr. Twit's face didn't grow nice and smooth. It was matted, as it does on most hairy-faced men. It grew in spikes and stuck out straight, like the bristles on a nail brush. And how often did Mr. Twit wash this bristly nail brush face of his? The answer is never. Not even on Sundays. He hadn't washed it for years. Then the next section is called Dirty Beards. As you know, an ordinary unhairy face like yours or mine gets a bit smudgy and is not washed often enough. And there's nothing so awful about that. But a hairy face is a very different matter. Things cling to hairs, especially food. Things like gravy go right amongst those hairs and they stay there. You and I can wipe our smooth faces with a flannel and we quickly look more or less right again. But a hairy man cannot do that. We can also, if we're careful, eat our meals without spreading it all over our faces. But not so with a hairy man. Watch carefully next time you see a hairy man eating with his lunch, and you will notice, even if he opens his mouth really wide, it is possible for him to get a spoonful of beef stew or ice cream and chocolate sauce into it without leaving it all over his hairs. Mr. Twit didn't even bother to open his mouth wide when he ate. As a result, and because he never washed, there was always hundreds of bits of old breakfast and lunches and suppers sticking out from all of the hairs on his face. They weren't big bits, mind you, because they used to wipe those off with the back of his hand, with his sleeve, and while he was eating. But if you looked closely, not that you'd want to, you could see tiny little specks of dried up scrambled egg stuck to the hairs, and spinach and tomato ketchup and fish fingers and minced chicken livers and all those other disgusting things that Mr. Twit liked to eat. And there's a little picture of him eating his delicious food there. If you looked closer still, hold your noses, ladies and gentlemen. If you peered deep into that moustachy bristles sticking out over his upper lip, you would probably see much larger objects had escaped the wipe of his hand, things that had been there for months and months, like a piece of maggoty green cheese or a mouldy old cornflake, or even the slimy tail of a tinned sardine. Because of all of this, Mr. Twit never really went hungry. By sticking out his tongue and curling it sideways to explore the hairy jungle around his mouth, he was always able to find a tasty morsel here and there to nibble on. What I'm trying to tell you is that Mr. Twit was a foul and smelly old man. He was also an extremely horrid man, as you will find out in a moment.